Heaven has always been a ceiling, a promise, and a consolation. That day, she became a wound. There was no warning. The air was clear, the wind common, and the world in its routine of noises when the light split in half like glass under a hammer. The crack ran from horizon to horizon, and from it flowed 1,000 dots that grew sharp until they became ships. They were not comets, they were not satellites, and they were not ours. They came in flocks, drawing lines like shoals of iron. The first shadows fell over the ports. The second is about the deserts. The third was about cities that had never seen war, and before anyone could name it, the speakers of the atmosphere itself spoke in a voice that had been born of dust, sun, and the patience of reptiles. We reclaim the world that was ours, the colony that slept too much. Surrender. They were called heirs, children of the ancient empire that had withered when the earth was still learning to plant seeds in rows. They kept the map and returned now, with huge hooves and hard shells in their eyes, certain that the blue planet was a mistake in the accounting of the galaxy. They didn't come to ask, they came to remember. The larger ships were like flying islands, metal-scaled backs, toothed keels, and engines that breathed offense. Around them, smaller swarms swirled, fast, like hungry hatchlings. Wherever they went, the air became heavy. The waves changed moods. Birds missed the path. The first few blows were too clean to look like war. Discrete cuts in the electrical networks, ports plastered by fields that locked anchors, blind satellites, as if they had blinked too long. Then came the messages that didn't need translation. An empty stadium cracked in half, a merchant ship delicately perched on top of a building, and a bridge bent in an arch, as if someone had tried calligraphy with steel. No one fired first. Even so, the war was already going on. On the high seas, fishermen turned off radios and looked at the sky with the eyes of those who know wind. In deserts, truck drivers parked and made calculations that did not fit on paper. In cities, mothers called their children inside before the sirens learned the new song. On the edge of the moon, the observatories saw lights turn on in places that did not light up. Tunnels under craters have had their ancient dust blown away, as one breathes over a forgotten ember. That's when someone on Earth, no one knows who, because names matter little when the world cracks, said in a low voice what everyone was already thinking out loud: they're here to stay. The reptilians did not claim victory. They organized. Surgical descents at key points, speeches polished by centuries of arrogance, treaties presented as gifts, and for those who resisted, a simple promise. We will be educated at the beginning. Their education hurt. Coastal cities had their ports tied with gravity chains. Entire warehouses were stuck to the ground as if they had roots. Coastlines were smooth, without a boat, without seaweed, and without a trace of people. On plains, occupation columns quickly appeared from fungus to humid. They were lean towers, full of eyes, who spoke little and saw everything. In low orbit, a necklace of smaller ships joined together like teeth rounding the planet. And yet, there were gaps. Every poorly designed cage does. A radar pylon that could not be stopped without also stopping its own mesh. An old shipyard with too much rust to read commands. A civilian university satellite that no one remembered to turn off. Small stubbornness of the physical world, where perfection does not dwell. It was through one of these loopholes that he first heard of the pilot who had spent his life deciding between landing and crashing, and almost always landing. He was called Aram in some documents. In others, he was listed with a false surname. The essential thing was the habit of talking quietly with motors, as if calming down an angry animal. I worked on an old freighter, long routes and short runways. On the day of the crack, it was in shallow skies when the air became heavy and the radio light. Between squeaks, something strolled in frequency like fish under a hoof. Imbriu, door, white. Aram looked at the horizon and looked at the moon. In Mare Imbrium, craters look at each other like gentle eyes of stone. Among them, who knows a door? He didn't know what it was. He knew enough. Someone on the moon was talking, and he spoke to us, not to them. On the ground, the world learned to fall on its feet. Firefighters trained with water, now they trained with silence. Sailors who knew currents and hooks looked at the ships as if evaluating a whale. It is not defeated by shouting, it pulls itself to the right beach. Mechanics kept batteries, talked with their hands, and measured iron with their eyes. Teachers, in empty courts, explained maps that were yet to happen. Children learned 3 signs with window flashes: stop, pass, and beware. The reptilians studied this spreading of people's wings and called it cultural noise. They sent commissioners with well-polished skins and well-aligned teeth to sell peace. Some have accepted. We always accept a glass of water while the house burns down. Others heard it and left the yes for later. Many just noticed how musty the word cologne smelled. On the night when the sky broke for the second time, not in a crack but in rain, 1,000 ships falling as if the sea had turned to air, Aram pointed the nose of his freighter at the moon and asked for a clue from those who could not give it. The answer came from a transmitter that was not on the maps. An old, grainy voice that seemed to have slept inside a stone. If you want to go in, follow the silence. He turned off everything that made noise. He flew with the hands on the bone, his hands sweaty, the engine talking on the edge between snoring and prayer. Up there, the gloomy spot of Imbrium waited with the patience of the crater that saw fire rain down and remain in the crater. And down on Earth, the first cities bit back. Not with fury, but with skill. Cables between buildings, nets on drones, buoys with magnets, and mines that were metallic fish lying on the bottom waiting for their shell. It was not beautiful. It was human. The rift of the sky had turned its way. Through it went up those who had instruments, courage, and despair, and those who had leather, teeth, and ancient history went down. Between one and the other, there was the exact space where a planet is decided. The war had begun, and it was not going to fit in a single sky. Aram learned early on that flying is talk. The plane speaks, vibrations, smells, a strange noise in the left roll, and a whisper in the flap when the wind enters crookedly. You answer with a light hand. If you yell at the machine, she yells back. On the night of the second slit, he went up with everything turned off that he could turn off. Only the essentials were lit. The freighter looked like an old fish rising against the current. The grainy voice returned, coming from an unnamed point on the map. Imbrium. White door. Follow the silence. The silence was a corridor without a radio, without an echo, without a star. A black hole the size of a path. Aram entered and felt the cockpit tighten around his chest, as if the space did not want to be visited. The altimeter was silly. The artificial horizon slept. He flew by tact, like someone who crosses a fog on the road without a headlight, remembering his father's teaching. When you don't see anything, trust what isn't pulling you down. The moon grew slowly, then fast, then suddenly it was too close. The dark tide opened its mouth. The crater Archimedes passed by like an eyelid without an eyelid. And then he saw a light circle on the dark ground, white as bones in the sun. It wasn't ice. It was no ordinary rock. It was a door. A shadow crossed the wing. 3 reptilian spacecraft swept into low orbit like sharks in a school. Aram turned off what little light was left and dived low, scraping off old dust. He felt his hoof groan. The voice on the phone came back, now closer, more human and more tired. Don't land. Sink. He asked no questions. He pointed his nose to the white circle. The surface looked solid, but the vision said there was depth there. 50 meters away, he waited for the impact. At 20, he held his breath. At 10, the white man gave in. The freighter pierced the skin of the moon as if entering a calm lake. For a second, there was nothing, neither sound, nor weight, nor world. Then a tunnel lit up around it, hexagonal smooth walls, playing pale rainbows. The altimeter has once again pretended to be useful. Earphone clicked. Welcome to the white well. It goes with the flow. It does not touch the walls. He followed. There were curves that didn't fit the geometry he knew. There were descents that looked uphill. There was a polite gravity who put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Come." At the end, the tunnel opened into a cavity, a cathedral of stone and light, with machines sleeping like whales. In the center, an oval platform. Aram landed on instinct. The landing gear touched the ground without singing. The engine shut down. Silence, finally, was welcome. 3 people were waiting. Worn clothes, sunken eyes, and skin with dust from centuries. The one in front took off her helmet. Hair up, scar on his eyebrow, smile of someone who can't afford to smile too much. He said enough. "I'm Aisha. We keep it here. You arrived at the wrong time, or the only possible one." Aram went down. The air tasted like stone. The dome up there showed a thread of small, stubborn blue earth. He pointed with his chin. "Down there." Isha took a breath, measuring her words. Invasion on 5 fronts, ports trapped, closed skies, towers planted. But we still breathe. The third guardian, a gentleman with trembling hands, led Aram to a panel that seemed carved, not assembled. It was a machine that pretended to be a rock. It was rock that played the role of a machine. Isha played 3 points with 2 phalanxes as an ancient ritual. "You heard our call because your radio is old and unfiltered," he explained. "And because you know how to fly low. We needed someone who would arrive without lighting a warning in orbit." "What's this here?" Aram asked, running his hand without touching. "A tooth," she said, "from when the earth could not yet say its own name." She told it without haste, because running kills memory. At the time when the reptilians first tried to bend the planet that would be Earth, they lost. Not for a better army, but for a stubborn world. Before leaving, they left a break on the moon's soil, a network of orbital nodders that, if activated, would make any fleet fall from the sky like iron rain. Over the millennia, humans have stumbled upon this place, deciphered pieces, and understood the basics. It was a weapon. It was dangerous. It was better to sleep until the necessary day. "Today is the day," Isha said simply. Aram looked at the sleeping whales around, curved metal bodies with ribs of light. On the ground, lines crossed like rivers on a map. In the air, there was that feeling of church before the wedding. Something is going to happen, and everyone knows, although no one admits it. "Why me?" he tried. "I'm not a soldier. I am not a saint." Isha smiled shortly. "Because you come and go, and it doesn't break anything along the way. We need someone who doesn't want to be in charge. Just plug in and go." The old man activated a hologram that looked like pretty smoke. The earth revolved there, surrounded by the teeth of enemy ships. Isha showed points. Necklaces of ships, locking fields, and the cracks where the meshes did not close. Overhead, over the Mare Imbrium, a mute light flashed. The well. "If we raise our teeth now," he said, "we'll knock everything down, including us." She explained the heart of the problem. The tooth did not choose a target. It pulled the whole sky. In order for the reptilian ships to fall and the Earth to survive, someone would have to teach the tooth to bite at intervals. Short, sector-like blows synchronized with windows where our satellites and aircraft were in shadow, in silence, in port. It was storm mathematics. And someone on Earth was needed to set the pace. "Do we have people downstairs for this?" Aram asked. "We have those who learn quickly." Isha touched the panel lightly. "We send seeds of instruction through old networks, community radios, and buried cables. They are already listening. The first step is missing." The old man brought an object wrapped in fabric. Aram recognized it before he saw it. The right weight, the right metal, and the shape that matches the hand. A key. It wasn't pretty. It was necessary. "It's going to hurt," Isha said, as if talking about vaccines. "Each bite will tear a piece out of the sky. Too many things will fall. But if not now, never again." Aram closed his eyes for a second. He saw small memories. A dirt runway in the countryside. The first time he flew without an instructor. The landing in the rain that saved children with fevers. And the light in his mother's kitchen. He opened his eyes and nodded. "Tell me when." "On Earth," The wen was already running from hand to hand. In ports, long horns marked compasses. On hills, drums responded. In makeshift control centers, paper maps were given pencil scratches. The plan was crude and delicate. When Aram took the first bite, entire cities would go out by choice, hiding what was ours. At the same time, bait would glow where there were no people. The sky would fall where the earth commanded. The reptilians felt the changing smell of the world. They adjusted formation. They tightened necklaces. They opened more mouths in the sky. Their voices echoed in the occupied towers. Last warning. Surrender. The warning became a soundtrack of preparation. Fishermen knotted cables that would hold hulls. Workers covered machines with blankets that deceive sensors. Teachers lined up children, hand in hand, heading to the darkest court. No one asked for heroism. Positions were requested. At the White Pit, Isha placed her hand on Aram's, guiding the key to a vessel that looked like a bloodless heart. When it turns, it doesn't come loose. The first bite will whisk you away. Safe. If I let go, the moon swallows you. Aram took a deep breath. Up there, the earth shone as a good memory. Down below, old machines woke up slowly. He turned the key. The whole cave sang, not with music, with sign. Lines on the ground lit up, whale ribs snapped, and the air became heavier and lighter at the same time. The hologram of the earth jumped. Isha looked at the old man. The old man nodded. In Aram's earpiece, a new voice came in, 1,000 voices, in fact, together. The markers below, testing rhythm. Imbrium, here on the east coast. 1, 2, 3. Imbrium, central plateau. Brand given. Imbrium, deep south, expecting a fall. Isha spoke without trembling. First bite, east sector. 3, 2, 1. Aram turned the key a tooth. The moon bit it. In orbit, a necklace of reptilian ships sank like a chain that breaks. 3 fell overboard. 2 crashed in the desert. 1 was pulled slowly, scratching mountains and spitting fire until it went out in the void. On land, ports purposely went out at the right second. Civilian radars went silent. Our planes embraced shadow. The bite passed like a strong wind and was gone. Second bite, Isha, north sector. The old man, Aram. The tooth went down again. The sky screamed. In occupied cities, the reptilian towers sizzled, losing anchor. With each fall, a human chorus rose, not of victory, but of continuation. Third, west. Go. Aram held the key with both hands. The well emanated ancient heat. The metal whales vibrated. He felt a nausea that came from deep childhood, when the wobbly floor seemed too big. He thought about letting go. He didn't. The voice of the enemies broke in the air, distorted, like wet glass. Surrender. 2 more, and we'll stop, Isha said. We'll leave the rest to Earth. Wednesday, south. Thursday, center. The 5th bite was huge. Aram saw stars twinkle on the ceiling of the cave. Outside, over the mare Nubium, a mothership tilted like an old whale and began to fall with sad dignity. In the distance on Earth, we all hear the sounds of many cities breathing at the same time. Isha took her hand away from Aram's, slowly. Enough for now. If we squeeze too much, we break the world together. He carefully released the key, fingers aching. The well has calmed down, like a large animal that decides to lie down. The old man erased the hologram. The earth rotated, wounded and alive. You come back, Isha said. They'll try to reorganize. The window opens and closes. We will need you here again. But now the earth has to play its part. What about you? Aram asked. We stayed. Someone needs to save the tooth for the next bite. He climbed onto the cargo ship with rubber legs. The tunnel took him back to White. White gave him back to the dark, and the dark gave him to heaven. When it came out of the pit, the reptilian ships were less and less nervous. The moon, for a moment, seemed to smile on the side that does not smile. On the radio, human voices came like a good fire. East Coast live, loose ports, plateau breathing, towers flashing, firm south, open sea. Aram pointed his nose home. The sky was still cracked, but now it bit back. And down there, in the rumble of the world, a million hands were preparing for what came next. The war had gained an old knife sharpened again. And with it, the moon will whisper the promise that every Earth understands. If you hold it at the right pace, even an old tooth learns to bite on your side. The moon bites were just the beginning. The sky was not clear. It was still cracked, full of metallic teeth. For each ship that fell, 3 others adjusted their route. The reptilian fleet was vast, old, accustomed to losing pieces and continuing to stand. They did not back down. They spread. 1,000 ships. He was not a figure of speech. 1,000 hooves descended in calculated waves, taking the Earth on different fronts. Each continent has received its weight. It was as if the entire planet was a one-day battlefield. In coastal cities, ports were surrounded by energy walls. Invisible chains held human ships as if they were trapped in giant nets. Cargo ships floated motionless, stuck between sea and sky, unable to retreat or advance. The first reptilian columns descended on docks, planting watchtowers in less than an hour. The goal was simple: to strangle trade and the sea. But the sea doesn't like owners. Fishermen, boatmen, and sailors began to improvise. They threw cables wrapped with magnets to interfere with enemy hulls. They lit bonfires on the beaches to fool sensors. They released schools of homemade drones made of cans and engines, confusing the invaders' radars. The sea, which has always been chaotic, has become an ally. In the deserts, ships descended like an iron storm. Towers appeared quickly, taking advantage of the firm ground. The reptilians believed it would be easy there, open lands, no hiding place. But they didn't count on the truck drivers and nomads, who knew every dune, every trail. Trucks have become mobile fortresses. Abandoned gas stations were clandestine radio networks. The desert has swallowed drones whole in sand traps. In the mountains, the smaller ships tried to hunt down hidden resistance. But the mountains are hard. Narrow tracks prevented the advance of large machines. Local people used mirrors to blind sensors with sun reflection. They played old horns to fool sound radars. And when the ships fired into empty valleys, they found that they were fighting echoes. Metropolises were the most targeted. The reptilians wanted to show power. They descended on São Paulo, New York, Mumbai, and Beijing. Towers sprouted in squares. Drones occupied avenues. But the big city has its own army. Too many people, too much noise, and too many tricks. Elevators were used as shields. Subways have become escape tunnels. TV antennas, thousands of them, were converted into jamming weapons. Each window flashed like code. Every street was a trap. Above all, the low orbit became a battlefield. The reptilians tried to form ship belts to suffocate the planet. But there were also people there. Civilian satellites, forgotten, were reactivated. Old stations, falling apart, have gained new life as platforms for espionage. Astronauts, who had previously done science in peace, now pointed lenses and sent coordinates to radios on the ground. And Aram, on his freighter, sewed among the wreckage, carrying messages and maps between the moon and Earth. Each front was its own struggle. There was no central command. There was no single flag. But there was rhythm. The moon's bites had given hope. And hope, when it spreads, turns into fire. Where one front suffered, another gained momentum. Where one neighborhood fell, another rose. The reptilians, accustomed to linear warfare, did not understand. They expected an army. They found a network. They expected discipline. They found improvisation. They expected fear. They encountered creative anger. Meanwhile, at the White Well, Isha and the Guardians prepared Aram for the second part. The Moontooth could not be used all the time. He needed to rest. But there was another function, forgotten in the codes, to send seeds of instruction to Earth. Small packets of data, compressed into signals that even old radios could decipher. Aram took the first seed in his freighter, hidden inside a box that looked like an engine part. It landed in the interior of Brazil, on a dirt track. He was received not by soldiers, but by farmers and radio technicians. He handed over the box. Inside, there were simple manuals: how to align antennas, how to fool sensors, and how to time for new bites. The papers were copied on mimeographs, distributed in school bags, and read aloud in churches. The manual became popular music. The reptilians felt the planet slip from their clutches. They decided to tighten up. They ordered coordinated burning, 1,000 ships attacking together, each one a city. The sky was filled with fire. It was real iron rain. The world seemed smaller, fragile, and ready to fold. But it was on that night that the humans proved that they were learning the game. There was no global order. There was a global response. Ports released boats at the same time. Deserts swallowed columns. Mountains returned echoes. Cities flashed codes in millions of windows. The entire Earth has become a living web. And in the middle of this web, Aram received a new coordinate from the White Well. There is something deeper. The well is not over. The secret of the moon was not yet all agreed upon. The skies were burning. The cities trembled. But it was in the ocean that the war found its greatest field. The reptilians believed that the sea would be easy territory. They did not know its currents, its tides, or the peoples who had always lived off the sway of the waves. As they descended with huge warships, they tried to drive power towers into coastal platforms and block sea lanes. The objective was clear: to cut the Earth in half, separate continents, and strangle trade. But the ocean has never been a friend of foreign currents. The first battles took place on the trade routes. Enemy ships descended like moving walls, closing passages between archipelagos. Fishing boats and freighters, apparently fragile, retreated and then returned with improvised tricks. They dragged nets full of old magnets and chains, creating magnetic fields that confused enemy hulls. Metal buoys attached to artisanal mines, made with scrap metal and demolition explosives, floated. The sea hid the traps until the last second, like a silent accomplice. In Atlantic ports, sailors gathered in quick assemblies, deciding that they would not fight each for himself. They swore on the high seas, with hands wet with salt, "If one of us sinks, 10 others will raise their sails." This pact later became known as the Oath of the Sea. It was not written on paper, but in blood and foam. Each crew promised to help the other, to share fuel, to share maps, and to share tricks. The sea, which has always been divided into flags, at that moment became a single flag. The reptilian fleets tried to enforce discipline with energy shots, but soon discovered that the ocean does not obey. High waves deflected beams. Heavy clouds hid vessels. With each storm, humans disappeared and returned in impossible positions. The machines made to fly in a straight line were lost in the irregular swing. The enemy's advantage turned into weakness. There was a night when hundreds of boats surrounded a reptilian mothership. They had no heavy weapons. They had collective intelligence. One group lured the drones the wrong way, another dropped nets under the keel, and another set buoys on fire to create smokescreens. When the ship tried to climb, it got caught in invisible cables and was dragged into the shallows, where it ran aground like a beast too heavy to return to the deep sea. The ensuing explosion lit up the sky for minutes. The crews embraced, not for revenge, but for survival. Meanwhile, Aram continued to take instructions from the White Well to different points on Earth. His freighter landed on small islands, delivering data boxes to community radios, which translated codes into simple words. When the turret flashes, knock twice. When the pulse quickens, respond slowly. And when the sky opens up, hide the boats in shadow. The instructions were repeated in songs, in work songs, and in stories told around campfires. They have become part of the culture of war at sea. But the reptilians also learned. They began to release floating spheres, machines that descended deep and exploded entire chains. They began to use gravitational fields to suck boats in and split them in two. The oceans were filled with wreckage, pieces of wood and steel floating between bodies. With each victory, there was a loss. With each loss, there was a new trick. It was at this point that the sailors decided to use the ocean's own fury as a weapon. They created false currents, releasing buoys that guided enemy ships to undertow areas. They tied cables to hidden rocks, waiting for the hooves to collide. Even the whales and dolphins, frightened by the chaos, began to move in schools that confused sensors. The whole sea seemed to conspire against the invaders. In a legendary battle, named after the Night of the Waves, hundreds of reptilian ships advanced across the Pacific. But the resistance had prepared the ground. Fake buoys, steel cables, and makeshift mines were scattered for miles. When the invaders entered, the ocean became a labyrinth. Many hooves collided with each other. Others were pulled down by artificial currents. The enemy fleet retreated for the first time since it had arrived. The oath of sailors spread beyond the sea. People from the interior listened and created their own pacts. Cities began to pledge support. Deserts, mountains, and metropolises entered the same rhythm. The earth, fragmented at first, began to stitch itself together as one. And while the sea defended his children, Aram received new messages from the White Well. There was something deeper on the moon. The tooth was not yet whole. There was a door that had not been opened. A power guarded beneath the mare Imbrium, waiting for the right time. The war on the ocean had given it breath, but what would come next would require more than boats, antennas, and tricks. It would require touching the heart of the moon gun. Aram returned to the moon in the dead of a night, when the earth burned on dozens of fronts. The freighter could barely take the effort, with its hull patched and engines coughing like an old asthmatic. But it arrived. The White Well received him as before. Thick silence, smooth walls, impossible curves. Only this time, there was not the calm of the first visit. The tunnel lights pulsed fast, like a heart racing. The moon itself seemed impatient. Aisha was waiting for him on the central platform, sunken eyes of someone who hasn't slept in days. The old guardian trembled more than before, hands tied in mute prayer. Without beating around the bush, she said, "The tooth is not whole. We only use the smaller fangs. The royal jaw still sleeps." Aram frowned. Wasn't what they had done enough? 1,000 fallen ships, reptilian towers failing, hope returning. "If we wake up the jaw, there is no going back," Aisha added. "It can bite to the heart of the earth if we don't know how to guide." In the center of the chamber, a moat was opened that was previously sealed. From it rose a pale glow, as if it were a moon within the moon. It was the White Well in its true form. The metal whales sleeping around slowly awakened, ribs of light igniting, emitting moans that sounded like the singing of sea animals. The old man spoke, in a weak but firm voice. "This place was built by the first ones who helped us drive out the reptilians millennia ago. They weren't like us, nor like them. But they left here as one last resort, a gravity weapon, capable of pulling the sky to the ground." Aram took a deep breath. Everything in him wanted to run away, get back on the freighter, and forget. But the memory of the burned cities, the sunken boats, and the children hiding in basements weighed more than the fear. "And what do you need from me?" Aisha stared at him as someone who delivers dangerous secrets. "You're not a soldier, you're not a leader. But he has the gift of following rhythm, to land where no one else lands. We need someone who doesn't want to be in charge, just to hold the key." Aram nodded. For days, they stayed inside the White Well, preparing their jaws. Power lines were reconnected. Symbols engraved on the walls were hastily translated. The old man explained how to read a dead language, each gesture slower than the last. Aram trained with the old key, learning to turn in exact measures. Short, long, pause. Short, short, pause. It was like dancing with the moon. Meanwhile, on Earth, the reptilians tightened their claws. Ships descended in swarms, trying to break the resistance for good. New towers appeared in capitals. Drones set entire neighborhoods on fire. The planet seemed about to fold. But the seeds sent by the well had already blossomed. Cities, deserts, mountains, and seas responded together, as if each people were a finger of the same hand. The oath had spread. Now, it wasn't just the sea. it was the whole Earth. When the well finally opened completely, the air vibrated like thunder. The jaw was ready. It was huge, invisible to the naked eye, but felt in every bone. A gravitational network hidden in the lunar subsoil, capable of pulling ships from the sky, as if pulling ripe fruit from the tree. Isha, her face lit up by the white glow, looked at Aram. If we miss the beat, we all fall. Earth, Moon, us. Are you ready? He wasn't. No one would be. But he took a deep breath, held the key, and said, "Tell me when." Down below, the Earth set the stage. Ports turned off lights to become shadows. Deserts have smoked to fool senses. Cities flashed windows in code. The sea, restless, was full of boats waiting for the signal. Everyone knew it would be now or never. The reptilian ships lined up for the final blow, 1,000 hulls forming a wall in the sky. It was the spectacle of domination they had always dreamed of. They wanted to show that the planet was folded, but in that instant, the moon's jaw woke up. Aram turned the key. The white well sang, ribs of light pulsed, and gravity curved like an arc ready to shoot. At the first roar, a dozen ships plummeted like shooting stars, burning until they touched the sea. The shock lit up oceans. The whole world saw it. In the second, hundreds were pulled in opposite directions, colliding in the air, bursting like iron fires. The sky was filled with debris, but also with clarity. The reptilians shouted in their towers, but there was no longer any possible order. The perfect wall had been broken. Heaven was no longer theirs. At the well, Aram was sweating, his hands aching as he held the key. Isha counted the bars. The old man marked the pauses. Every bite had to be measured, every interval calculated. If they overreacted, the whole world would suffer. But if they were timid, the fleet would survive. Down below, the entire planet looked up. Children in shelters smiled at the sight of lights like fireworks. Sailors clapped to the rhythm. Desert people shouted in unison. Entire cities sang to mark time. It was as if the whole Earth were a metronome for the moon. The jaw was biting. The sky was shattering. When the last bite was over, there were few enemy ships left. Some fled. Others hovered hesitantly, as if waiting for an order that would never come. The fleet that seemed eternal was now just scattered shards. Aram let go of the key, exhausted. The white well fell silent again, breathing like a sleeping beast. Isha put her hand on his shoulder. "We haven't won yet, but we showed that they do not rule alone." He looked at the blue earth, glowing in the midst of chaos, and thought, maybe this is the beginning of something bigger than all of us. The reptilian fleet still covered part of the sky, but it was no longer a wall. It was broken, full of holes, with hesitating ships, failing engines, and crooked formations. For the first time since the invasion, they did not advance with confidence. They hovered like wounded predators. That was the instant the Earth had been waiting for. From the cities, signs began to line up. Windows flickered in concerted rhythms. Ports released improvised rockets that indicated coordinates. Deserts kicked up smoke in patterns that looked like just dust, but were maps seen from above. The mountains returned marked echoes, repeating orders at natural frequency. The entire planet spoke the same language without words. Aram, still at Pocho Branco, held the key firm. The lunar jaw could not be used carelessly, but it was ready to support. Isha murmured bars, and the old man marked the pauses. The goal was not to destroy everything at once, but to open corridors, windows of attack, and tiers in the sky that the resistance could use. The first corridor opened over the Atlantic. The reptilian fleet tried to surround human ships, but the moon pulled 3 hulls at once, throwing them into the sea. The crash shook the waves, and the boats took advantage. They dropped homemade mines and magnetic cables, holding the rest of the formation until it shattered. The second runner appeared in the desert. Enemy ships prowled human columns, but the lunar bite tilted gravity, making the hulls weigh more than they could support. The ships sank into dunes, trapped like bogged-down animals. Truckers advanced in ranks, throwing nets and chains, leaving the invaders buried. The third corridor opened up in space, near low orbit. Reptilian ships tried to maintain a belt around the Earth, but the lunar jaw closed an arc and broke the chain. Human satellites were released. Old, hitherto silent stations sent fire signals, giving coordinates for synchronized attacks on the ground. It was war on a planetary scale, but for the first time the rhythm was human. There was no central command. Each person acted by instinct, guided by the same compass. When the moon bit, when the Earth hid, the moon held. When the enemy fleet tried to react, it encountered makeshift booby traps on each front. At the White Well, Aram almost fainted from fatigue. His fingers were numb, but he wouldn't let go of the key. He felt the weight of gravity, as if it were physical, crushing his chest and back. Isha kept him standing, marking the rhythm in a firm voice. The old man recited prayers in a forgotten language, as if he were speaking directly to the moon. Up there, the last reptilian ships lost formation. Some fled in silence. Others tried to attack in anger, but were swallowed up by the disorder itself. The fleet that had descended like a flood was now just wreckage illuminating the atmosphere, crashing into seas, deserts, and mountains. When the last ship broke up in mid-air, the entire Earth fell silent. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of breath, trapped. Then, like a wave, the sound came back. Shouts, clapping, laughter, drums, and horns. The whole planet celebrated at the same time. It was impossible not to hear, impossible not to feel. The war was not over yet, but the sky no longer belonged to the invaders. Aram released the key and collapsed on his knees. The lunar jaw closed slowly, returning to heavy sleep. Isha put her hand on his shoulder and said quietly that this was just the first end. The reptilians would not give up so easily, but the message was already given. The Earth was not a colony. The Earth bites back. Do you want me to move on now to the epilogue, after the rain of fire, closing this story with the impact that this victory leaves on Earth and the galaxy? The sky took weeks to clear. Fragments of enemy ships burned night after night, streaked the atmosphere like meteors, and crashed into seas and deserts. Children pointed to the lights and said they were victory fireworks. Scientists were collecting debris, trying to make sense of the technology. Farmers buried pieces of metal that fell in their fields, saying that now the soil would know about the fighting as well. On Earth, there was no parade, no government raising a flag. There was reconstruction. Liberated ports have once again received improvised boats. Deserters have erected new antennas from enemy carcasses. Cities began to paint murals on the broken walls. The fallen column, the ships at sea, and the bite of the moon. Each mural was a living memory. The reptilians did not send a message of surrender. It was not in his nature to admit defeat. Their escaped ships retreated in silence. But in distant galactic councils, the conversation has changed. Where once they spoke of the Earth as a forgotten colony, they now spoke as of the world that broke the sky into 1,000 pieces. No race that had faced the reptilians before had been able to break such a vast fleet. And yet, humans, fragile and chaotic, had done it. Aram returned to his freighter. He was not a hero, and he was not a commander. But everyone looked at him differently. He only said that he had not done anything alone, that the victory was not his, but everyone's. Isha stayed at the White Pit, next to the old guardian, to watch the jaw. They promised that she would only bite again, when there was no other way out. The Moontooth was sleeping, but now everyone knew where it was. At sea, the oath continued. Fishermen tattooed the promise on their arms. Truck drivers drew symbols on the bumpers. Children on the hills beat drums recalling the bars of battle. The Earth had found something it would never lose. The sense of being one voice, even speaking in 1,000 accents. And when the sky finally cleared, on a clear night, everyone looked up. They saw no threat. They become memories. The scars on the moon shone like a crooked smile. And in that smile was engraved what no one else could erase. The day when humans, fragile and improvised, defeated a fleet of 1,000 ships. The day the sky fell, but not on us. The day the Earth learned to bite back.